I mentioned previously that the three most important forces within the emergence of the modern Middle East are nationalism, Islamism, and anti-Israeli feeling. And in looking at anti-Israeli feeling, what we're dealing with here is really the rise of Jewish nationalism, or that is what's referred to as Zionism. Zion was one of the ancient Jewish terms for the promised land of Palestine. In the centuries after the great Jewish revolt against Rome, the Jews became dispersed in the diaspora throughout the Middle East and Europe. They played a critical role in both the Muslim Middle East and also in Christian Europe. The Jews were especially prominent in Muslim civilization as scholars, scientists, physicians, translators, and they also served in the administration of the early Muslim caliphal state. Many over time converted to Islam, but most did not. Islam in general was far more tolerant of Jews than were Christians in their kingdoms within Europe. In both regions, both in the Middle East and also in Europe, Jews were second-class citizens. By the end of the Middle Ages in 1400, most Jews in Western Europe's kingdoms had been forced out, and they drifted off into the regions of Central but especially Eastern Europe, and particularly into the Kingdom of Poland, Lithuania. Spain was the last Western European kingdom to expel its Jews, this being in 1492. In no place in Europe did the Jews find complete acceptance or the allowance to practice their religion or work and live as they chose. There were periodic pogroms, or that is, outright persecutions and massacres of Jews by crazed Christian mobs. By the 18th century, the greatest concentration of Jews lived in what became known as the Jewish Pale, that is, the former lands of Poland and Lithuania, now under Russian control. In the 18th century, with the French Revolution and the rise of more liberal regimes in Western and Central Europe, you find that Jews were given the same civil freedoms as others, that is, freedom of religion, of opportunity, of assembly, of residence, of expression, and equality before the law. The lifting of discriminatory laws allowed Jews to enter the universities, seek the education necessary for careers in law and medicine, enter their own businesses, or develop careers in journalism. By the late 19th century, Jews in Germany, France, England, and Austria were very prominent in all of these areas and many others as well. Though legal discrimination had been lifted, there was still much dislike of the Jews or anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism in Europe had always had at least three foundations. Religious, in that many Christians held Jews responsible for the killing of Christ. Racial or ethnic, that is, that the Jews were a very different people as the Europeans saw them, and many were convinced that they were unassimilable. And then also economic. Many people by 1900 were very jealous of the great success the Jews had come to have in business, industry, commerce, and the professions. With the rise of democracy and mass-based politics, you have demagogues who use this dislike or outright hatred of Jews to create their own political movements. Certain politicians in Vienna were to use hateful invective against the Jews to rise to power. And you find similar phenomena also in Germany and in France, and in what would become the East European countries after World War I. A variety of Jewish scholars and journalists became convinced that Jews would never completely be free unless they had their own country or homeland where they could be free to live as Jews with no constraints or discrimination imposed by a majority population. The most important person in what became known as Zionism or the Zionist movement, which means the return to the homeland of Palestine, was Theodor Herzl. He became the most important propagandist in this movement of returning Jews to the ancient promised land of Palestine. Zionism attracted very few assimilated Jews in the West European countries, but came to attract large numbers of Jews living in the Russian Empire, where persecution of Jews was intense in the last decades of the 19th century and the early decade of the 20th century. Some Jews went off to the Holy Land or the ancient countries of Judea and Israel. The Ottoman Empire, which was obviously the overlord of that area, did not cater to this idea of establishing a place for the Jews to live in complete freedom to be Jews. To Muslims, Palestine was also Holy Land, and Jerusalem was sacred to the Muslims. In fact, it's regarded as the third most holy site after Mecca and Medina. Zionism is Jewish nationalism. This should not be surprising. The 19th century in Europe was an age of nationalism. Nationalism brought disruption to the great multinational empires of Europe. The Irish wanted out of the British Empire. The Poles wanted to have their own state, independent of the occupying powers of Germany, Austria, and Russia. The idea of a nation-state and loyalty to the nation was born in the French Revolution, when the French transformed the monarchy of France into the Republic of France. From the beginning of Jewish settlements in Palestine, it was the intention of creating a Jewish state. The real impetus for this was to come in World War I, when the British government stated that it would work for realizing the Zionist aim of creating a Jewish homeland in Palestine. The dissolution of the Ottoman Empire and the substitution of British control over the Mandate territory of Palestine provided the Jews with the opportunity to establish the Zionist dream of creating or resurrecting an Israel for the first time since the 4th century before the birth of Christ. The rise of Nazism in Germany brought even more worse anti-Semitism, and then to Europe following the outbreak of World War I. After World War II, even more Jews sought refuge in Palestine. The Jewish immigrants incurred the wrath of the Arab population because they simply did not like the hundreds of thousands of Jews who had come into Arab-dominated Palestine. And you find, of course, that the British were essentially caught in the middle and ultimately attacked by both sides. And they simply give up and walk out and turn the mandate of Palestine over to the new United Nations. And you can read about this in your text as well in terms of the different partition plans that the United Nations first came up with. And what really happens, of course, is that there's simply a war that breaks out between Jews and Arabs. Jews and Arabs in Palestine, and then also with Jews against Arabs in Palestine and the nations of Syria, Transjordan, and Egypt. And out of that, of course, comes the defeat of both the Arab Palestinians and these allied Arab states of Egypt, Syria, and Transjordan, and the emergence of an independent Israel in 1948. And so this Zionist dream, first enunciated by Theodor Herzl back in the late 19th century, came to fruition, you can say, within a period of 50 years. And obviously it only came about in part because of very sufficient assistance by the British. And the emergence of Israel, of course, is something that most Arabs have not been willing to accept. And since that time, there have been several subsequent wars between Israel and its Arab neighbors.